Hello and welcome to another episode of Around the Verse, our weekly look behind the scenes at Star Citizen's development. I'm Sandi Gardiner.
And I'm Steve Bender. In today's episode, our designers will discuss how we're implementing atmospheric flight and differentiating it from space travel.
But first, let's check in on the development team and take a look under the hood in this week's Burndown.
Welcome back to Burndown, our weekly show dedicated to reviewing progress on the release of Star Citizen Alpha 3.0. We're getting close to live release, so let's check out how things are going.
So we're on target now with the issues we've got. We're getting quite a few of the issues fixed up, and the ones that are propping up are more feature-related issues, which are a lot simpler to fix most of the time than code issues. So it's good to see that we're moving into this transition of feature issues rather than code.
For the rest of the team, we're now into bug fixing and polishing mode for 3.0, so the remaining issues after I've gone through and moved the tasks will leave us with any outstanding bugs for 3.0. Obviously more will come in as some of these features are tested a bit more heavily and QA are focusing more on hammering those.
So the mission givers, they went through a full QATR. I did my review last week. However, that was not in the game. It wasn't multiplayer, so now we have a review set this week for the full in-game and basically being able to switch between all the different reputation and virtue variables so that we can see all of their lines, and then once that's good, that will be signed off, but we're basically in the final 95% of it.
On the mission giver side of things, we are turning attention to the feedback that Todd Pappy has given this week. He's given some feedback in relation to the animations having issues where the character is looking off a certain direction and then we'll snap back and look at you when he's delivering his lines. We're also making sure we're putting the final finishing touches on Ruto to make sure the overall effect of Ruto's coming out of the hologram looks really good. So we're getting those final details locked in and should have those characters ready to go soon.
One of the strange issues that popped up last week was all AI and NPC ships were spawning in without pilots. They were spawning in completely empty, which meant that none of the missions that involved those could be completed, or you couldn't play Vandal Swarms. The ships just didn't do anything. So Rob Johnson spent some time and he was able to fix that one up again before we went to PTU.
So we received this bug regarding holo objects from DE, where basically shadows from holo objects were being cast onto the main scene. Holo objects are basically invisible to the main player camera, and we resolved this bug by basically during the shadows zone query we have a bunch of flags that we can say ignore these types of objects or take these types of objects, and we basically resolved it by saying for the shadow zone query ignore holo objects from coming through, and therefore it won't render in the shadow pass and you won't get a shadow appearing in the main scene.
Today I'm going to show you the bug that we're calling the Ghost of Grimhex. This is the room where we meet Ruto, one of our mission givers, as you know. It looks nice and empty. Everything is fine. Look what happens when I turn on the flashlight. There's a ghost. It's not a shadow, it has a volume. What it actually is, it's actually Ruto himself. To create this hologram, we are putting invisible NPC into the world, then we animating it and projecting to the hologram. And apparently this invisible NPC can be illuminated with a flashlight. At the moment, bug is on the graphics programmers. We're hoping to fix it soon, so you could have Grimhex without any ghosts.
So the NPC admin officer I reviewed last week, and that, from a behavior standpoint, was good. Now we are doing the final step of that, which is integrating that into the actual missions. And so once those are done, I will review it from start to finish in an actual mission, and then it will be signed off.
We have just started balancing the environmental missions. So these are the probability volumes that you may have heard of that Tony Zurvik has been working on. So these are in our dev builds. So you'll be like, quantum traveling along and be pulled out. There's an asteroid, kind of rogue asteroid, floated in the path of the thing, and maybe it's caught a few other people involved, in there as well. And it could be pirates, it could be something smashed into it. So there's a little to explore or interact with while you're quantum traveling. As I say, these are not obviously released yet, but because we're trying to balance these, so it doesn't feel like kind of Final Fantasy constantly being pulled out to fight a bad guy kind of thing as you're trying to get from A to B, which it currently does. So yeah, we're tuning those until we get something that's kind of rare, but so it kind of shocks you when it happens.
Our admin office worker, our designers are still continuing to work on that, and we've pretty much closed that out now. We're just now implementing those into the mission flow so that you're able to interact with them and that you get mission markers specifically denoting them. And one of the issues we've noticed for a while, as well as been raised by some of our best pilots in the community, is an ESP bug where ESP was not being able to pull you onto target. After several of our team looking into this actually seems to be part of a bigger issue with IFCS, and IFCS oscillating, so slightly moving around and overcompensating and undercompensating in particular circumstances. Both John and David have been looking into this week so that they can get to the bottom of it. We fixed one of the bugs with this, which should improve it slightly, but the team will continue to work on this so we can make sure that ESP and IFCS is as good as it can be for our 3.0 release.
On the ship setup side, we are just in bug fixing and polish mode now. We are fixing bugs left and right, bugs to do with 300 series animation issues, or the players getting up into the 300i and being shoved out through the bottom of the ship somehow. We're fixing up landing gear issues on the glaive. The glaive is not really landing properly and tipping over. We're fixing up issues with the Herald atmosphere. There's certain parts of the Herald where if you stand at the especially right spot, you can suffocate and die. So that's a problem. We're fixing that up also. We're also turning attention to some balance things as well. We have shield balance in QA testing right now. We've got four-sided shields where you can actually divert power to various parts of the shields and stuff like that. So we're testing to make sure that looks good and feels good for each ship. We're also doing that across a number of different ships as well and items to make sure that the balancing effort is going smoothly.
We will be doing some final work on the EMP to get that ready, and for the most part, it turns off everything in the ship already. It turns off the MFD, it turns off the power. However, there were some still 2D layers of the HUDs that were not being turned off. We'll get those turned off, and so I view those as kind of minor bugs, but that should be good to go as well.
This week I've been working on a lot of ship issues. They've been multiple and numerous. We have a lot of issues with the doors coming in. You've noticed the Caterpillar doors slamming shut and a wall of collision preventing you from getting out. We've also had problems with the Constellation cargo bay, culling and lighting issues. A lot of this is because we've now separated the doors as items now to better communicate and do damage in the future, the systemic damage work. So this is going through different processes, some art related, some technical. Sometimes I'm passing it to an engineer. Sometimes I'm fixing it myself, and there's also rigging issues. So there's numerous issues going on caused by the itemization, but we're working through those problems.
So we've made updates to the shields. The real update that was made was that we have actually balanced all the shield healths, which we'd have an opportunity to do that in the past, and so I'm sure a lot of players are frustrated with how difficult it was to take down ships. So what we've done is we've taken all of the size, the vehicle and the size 1, 2, and 3 shield generators and then balanced the health so that they're a reasonable value for the 4 faces on each of the ships that we have so far. The recharging time, you'll notice, is much more reasonable too, in that it'll take some time to charge all 4, and this results in each individual face taking some time to take down, and without allowing them to charge at too rapid a pace so that it's impossible to take down a face a shield that you're hitting with your guns.
The shield screen consists of indicators for your power, your regen rate, the actual amount of health in each shield face, the distribution of the shield health across the shield system, as well as the status of the hardening system, whether it's active, how much cooldown time there is, and also it lets you know when you have when your regen is broken, when you hit 0 health, it has to recover from that. So you also have a standby button to let you trigger that.
So this week I've been working on overall damage and debris. There's been some changes on the engineering side for how our ships break apart. So I've just been going through all the ships with a fine-tooth comb and making sure that all the pieces break apart in the correct order, and you know, the overall ship dies and everything flies away correctly. There's been some ghost debris that kind of hangs around afterwards, and we have various issues we're working through to make sure all the ships look as cool as possible and actually work correctly.
With insurance integration, there's just minor bugs right now where it's just not showing the player's balance or how long it has to remain. As soon as we get those bugs fixed, then everything will be good to go.
And this week in our Burndown, we've fixed some issues with GravLev. So one of the issues that we've been seeing on the PTU build is the bikes dragging across the ground. We've severely reduced the amount of times this happens, although there's still a few user cases where this is still occurring, and we'll continue to investigate these.
So with item 2.0 balance, as well as the atmospheric flight tuning, we've finished what we consider kind of first pass on those with the balancing and everything. That will continue until we actually ship 3.0. As far as the atmospheric flight, we feel that's in a pretty good place, and we've just recently checked in some new fixes for that, and some new balancing for that as well. But with item 2.0, we've gone through and we've done some more fuel adjustments, and we're getting that to the place where we see. So it really depends on how the players hammer on the boost button, and if they're flying conservatively, then the fuel will actually last longer, and it's getting to the place where, from a design standpoint, we feel it's right. Then going through and adjusting the power, the shields, those will be kind of a constant ongoing thing until we actually ship 3.0.
We've gotten some more atmospheric flight issue fixes in, which include fixing turbulence when the ships are stationary. So one of the things you may have seen in some of the previous PTU builds is even when the ships are stationary, they'll still wobble as if they're being impacted by turbulence, which most of you will know that isn't even vaguely realistic, so we fixed that.
Ship item UI integration, we're on the second of 3 QATRs. So ideally Bone gets the third one in today, and then once those are all in, we should be good to go. And at that point we'll set up a review to look at it, make sure that everything is ready for the players. Then from there, with the PMA, that is finally entered in QATR. We have the categories the way that we want them to be. We're finalizing the highlighting. So ideally, once that finishes the QATR, then we'll be ready to flip the switch and say that is feature complete. The BMA is being worked on right now as we speak. Since most of the work that is being done on the PMA transfers directly over to the BMA. So then from there we'll probably need to do some minor cleanups and the way that we sort through the list of the items that are on the ship, but that's pretty minor. Personal Inner Thought went through an impromptu desk review with Chris yesterday, and that is basically in designer's hands now to implement it the way that Chris wants it. And so I think from a feature standpoint that there's just minor fixes on that one.
We've had loads of work going into the persistent spawning. Right now in the PTU, people can use the beds as a save point to log out and then come back to. They can use a personal inner thought to do this when they get into the bed, and we've been having some great feedback about that already.
As for performance, we made some good progress, especially now with the feature lock in place. So the features are locked, and now we as a performance team can go in and really see, okay, this is the set of features we want to ship with, and we can go in and see, okay, where can we improve even more? Because prior to that, of course, new features were coming in, and we had to go over and over again because new features might, of course, cause some more performance trouble for us. But now with the feature lock, we can really go in and see, okay, where can we improve? On the other side, what helps us as well is people now stop working on new features and do have the time to go in and actually fix what we point out to them. So instead of working on features, we can now work on performance and actually polish what we've already got.
Last week we had David Coulson working on the ranged-based serialized variable update culling, which is an amount of work that should improve performance quite significantly across the board, especially with larger player caps, going up to 40 and 50 player caps. He checked in that work on Friday, but it has created a few issues which QA highlighted in a test request that they were doing for this work. So since then we've had David, Clive on the network team and Chris Balti over in DE all working together on trying to resolve these issues, and some of them include things like desync, performance spikes, issues where you're spawning incorrectly. So things like that, they've been working together to try and get them all fixed so we can get that out to the public and tested on the large scale that we needed for.
Last week we've been fixing issues. Probably most notably there was a bug where if a server had been running for about 6 hours, physics time would start going backwards. One of our network guys spotted the issue, put a fix in, and now time always goes forwards, which is good to know.
Personal inner thought has passed its final review now, so that's also in the PTU for people to use. We've been getting some great feedback about that as well. There are still things we want to change and to polish as the final pass before we're okay with it being the final implementation for 3.0, but this is very, very close now.
Stress testing the game with thousands of people playing continues to throw off tremendous amounts of information regarding both performance and stability. Daily updates using our Delta patcher are allowing us to charge ever closer to this live release. As of filming this, we're at 176 must-fix issues for our live release candidate of Star Citizen Alpha 3.0. The team has checked in over 518 updates to the branch and closed dozens of issues every day as leadership continues to hone in on what's absolutely necessary to address to go live as quickly as possible. See you next week here on Burndown.
Don't forget to check out our weekly production schedule report on the website for even more insight into the development process.
Now, as many of you have noted in the forums, piloting a ship in space should, of course, feel very different than flying in a planet's atmosphere.
That's right. Aside from gravity to contend with, wind and weather will eventually be factors while flying planet-side. Our team has been fine-tuning the functionality that will help make atmospheric flight feel convincing and distinct.
Let's see what they have to say about the unique design challenges associated with introducing these new mechanics.
So I'm Mike Snowden, the VFX director.
I'm David Coulson. I'm a junior gameplay programmer here that sort of ended up specializing in flight control and IFCS sort of tasks.
I'm Andrew Nicholson and I'm tech designer at Foundry 42.
My name is John Pritchett. I'm a senior physics programmer here. I specialize in the vehicle control systems, flight model. I work with missiles, any place where we need control systems.
When you talk about the atmospheric flight, we're talking about the long-term goal and implementing a short-term goal as well. Long-term goal, we want to have thrusters performing differently in space and in atmosphere. In space, you've got way more thrust to use, and it's going to be like an impulse effect, so you have these really high accelerations at a very short length of time, so the pilot can manage them. They're not really high G-force, but for a very short length of time. And the opposite to that is sustained thrust, and that would be what we use in atmosphere. So you have to always be firing these thrusters to stay above the planet. Say gravity, you're fighting gravity with these thrusters, so you get much less performance. And so that being the long-term ambition of how thrusters work, in the short term, we're trying to implement how would that feel. So when you enter atmosphere, come to any of the planetoids in 3.0, the ship is using what would be sustained thrust, which means lower acceleration. And to do that, we're kind of switching to a different state, like an atmospheric flight state, which means you cross the threshold, you enter atmosphere, and now you've got less acceleration to play with. There's more to do there when we want to do the asymmetrical effects of drag on stop times and performance, but right now that's not there. So my role is taking the numbers that we have for space flight, looking at the performance of the ship, and then translating that down into atmospheric, which as a general rule is like, I see it as being 2.5 times less performance, so you've got less acceleration. So I basically take the space flight, run the numbers in a big spreadsheet, and then translate that into what we need for third order motion. So we've got the velocity and the stop time, then we need a jerk value for that. And so I have to put all these numbers into a spreadsheet, get the jerk value out, and then put these into a ship XML, get them into the lumberyard, and then run like an output, which gives me all the tuned parameters, and then I use those to put back into the ship XML. It's kind of a laborious process. The fun side of it is the back and forth play test. You know, you get these numbers and then you go, oh, this ship is way too sluggish, it's too slow. I'll tweak them here, I'll raise the accelerations here, and do the retune of the ship. In some cases, with the larger ships, you have the problem of, all right, now you switch them to this atmospheric tuning, they've gone below, in some cases, below 1G acceleration, so they'll start to fall in atmosphere. So then it's a case of, all right, I'll take power away from some of the maneuvering thrusters and power them into just the thrusters on the bottom of the ship for Z. And once you've done that, I mean, then they can enter atmosphere and not just crash into the ground. I had that problem with like the Starfarer, the Caterpillar, that just plummet, and you just siphon it off from the other thrusters basically to get that performance. In future ships like the Starfarer, they'll use VTOL thrusters. We don't have them set up to do that just yet, so it is kind of like, let's just take it off the maneuvering thrusters and make sure it flies okay.
I get to basically design the physics, you know, the flight model itself, and implement that into the game. Develop a system that allows the designers to tune the ships to get the behaviors that they want out of them. In our game, all of our vehicles will be spaceships, but we want to have the ability to bring those spaceships planet-side into atmosphere. And when we do that, we wanted to include additional forces in the flight model, to include drag, lift, some turbulence from wind, and different factors like that.
So previously the atmospheric model was like counteracting for gravity and drag. So it would just use the thrusters to basically balance out gravity and balance out drag, which is, you know, if you were making a spacecraft or a fighter plane in real life, that's what you'd want to do, because it makes it fly really precisely. But what it means is that it sort of feels like you're flying in space, because you just can't feel the gravity because the flight system is just trying to counteract it. And we got a lot of this sort of feedback from the Gamescom presentation particularly. So the new model tries to use gravity and drag to help it. So for example, if you are trying to slow down downwards, you can use gravity to help you, and you can use less thruster force and it will become easier. So you've got gravity to help you when you're trying to slow down going upwards, you'll slow down slower. And so what happens in the end is that you sort of have this like asymmetric imbalance in the ship that you can feel. And so say for example, if you're trying to slow down with your pointy Gladius ship going in towards the wind, you're going to slow down a lot slower than if you angle your thing up like this and try and fly like this. And so you can really feel like it feels like you're in the atmosphere. and it feels like there's air that's pushing on your ship. So we've been working on that pretty much since Gamescom, but our immediate goal for the PTU release is a little bit more of a turbulence simulation. So what we have now is turbulence and wind that sort of affects the stability of the ship, I guess. So if you start flying really fast, the ship sort of shakes and bustles about, and you can sort of feel like you're right at the edge of, you know, the aerodynamic limits of the ship, which feels really good. And it again separates it from feeling more like you're in space when you can't really feel anything because you're just in nothingness pretty much. So this is what we have now, and it's pretty much in the game now and running, and it feels really good. You can feel a lot of difference between like aerodynamic ships, like say the Gladius can go quite fast and it's sort of just a little bit shaking around, and then, you know, something that's shaped like a brick, like the Aurora, is like shaking all around. You can't really control it super well, and it's really hard to fly, which is good. Some of the tuning that Andy's been doing has like been trying to find this line of what's too uncontrollable and what feels good but is uncontrollable. Like uncontrollable is too strong of a word. It's more just that we want you to feel like you're at the limits of this ship, and if you push too hard, you're going to lose control. But we don't want it to be that you can't control it in the atmosphere, which is just not fun. We actually have had some of those issues with really small ships like the Merlin and the Gravlev bikes, because they can now fly in the atmosphere as well, and they're really small and light, and you really get pushed around a lot in like, you know, in high winds, and you're moving really fast. It feels really strongly that you're not quite in control anymore, which feels really good. And it really separates the flight from being in space to being in the atmosphere, which is what the goal was.
The way I approach that actually is more through the control systems, which is what interfaces the player, or in real life, the pilot or whatever, with the vehicle. That sets limits on what they can do with the vehicle and how the vehicle performs or whatever. So you can still have realistic physics while at the same time creating more of a traditional gameplay experience through the way the controls are interpreted and the vehicle responds to the player. We
basically have this ability to specify goals in position or velocity or acceleration, and the ship will try and achieve those goals. So the most complicated one is position, which isn't used for general flight, it's more used for AI and stuff, where you say, I want to get to this goal, and the system will try and figure out how much to power each thruster and everything to actually achieve that goal. We use the velocity goal and the acceleration goal for when you're actually flying around, you know, you are controlling the ship. And those controllers now basically include drag and gravity in their predictions. So if you say, hey, I want to get to 200 meters per second in this particular direction, the algorithm will look through all of the current forces that it has available and go, okay, hey, gravity is helping us in this particular direction that we're trying to accelerate, so we don't actually need to give as much thruster force. Or maybe if you're going the other direction, you need to give extra gravity to counteract the other side of gravity, which maybe your thrusters just don't have enough thrust to give enough force to counteract gravity plus what you actually want to move in that direction. And so that's now included in that core model, which is the one part of it. And then the turbulence stuff is a second layer that we have on top of the flight control system. So, you know, we have the control logic, which is you or an AI give input into the system, and the system will try and figure out how to get to that configuration. And then after that, we have all the extra stuff, which is things like turbulence, just random error and stuff like that gets added on top, which is, you can think of it as like the external forces that are moving or attempting to move the ship that you are not in control of. And so obviously turbulence and wind is the big part of that one. So when you're flying around, you'll have your control input and you'll say, hey, okay, I want to get to this configuration. And then on top of that, the turbulence system is going to calculate some turbulence based on the atmospheric density and the wind and everything. And it's going to say, hey, I'm going to add this extra force, which is going to move your ship. And then the ship will obviously have to react to that. You'll have to react to that. And the reaction systems will try and kick in to keep you on the goal that you want. But, sometimes the ship just won't have enough thrust to do it, and you'll get off course, or, the ship will be bustling around or something like that.
We dynamically calculate the cross-sectional areas for each ship. So the amount of surface area that comes into play in drag will be unique for every ship. And not just for every ship, but based on the state of the ship. So if it gets a wing blown off, that's going to affect not only the amount of surface area that it has for drag, but also the center of drag, where that is relative to the center of mass on the ship, and that'll result in torque based on drag and things like that. So it's a very accurate drag simulation.
So the thing about atmospheric flight, specifically with the effects, is there's always going to be a transition. When you're on a planet or a moon that's actually got atmosphere, that's when we're going to get the contrails instead of engine trails. So the key to it is it's a visual thing, so it gives people a sense visually that there's different things happening here, and obviously that's just backing up the actual what the ship's doing and how people have got to react to that. So yeah, contrails, you're going to see other players' contrails, so if you're chasing or if you're in a pack or if you're in a dogfight, you're going to see these contrails based on the fact that you're inside this atmosphere.
We take a little bit of unrealism just out of practicality. Like, for example, in real life, the atmosphere doesn't really end. It just sort of extends out arbitrarily into space, getting thinner and thinner and thinner. But we actually have a line where we're like, past this point there is no atmosphere, past this point there is. But the atmosphere below this line is really weak. And so when you get into that sort of part of the atmosphere, first of all, you'll start seeing the atmospheric reentry effects, particularly if you're coming in from like orbital speeds. As you get lower and lower, you start to feel it more and more and more. And when you start to get really low, it actually, we're still sort of tuning this, but what we would like is for right on the surface, you actually feel it less. You don't have the turbulence of wind blowing over hills and mountains that you have a little bit higher up in the atmosphere. So when you get lower, it's actually a little bit safer and a little bit more stable than if you were to try and fly a little bit higher. We actually had some issues when QA were testing the system, where they reported that you could fly at like extremely high speeds in Yela's atmosphere, and immediately we were concerned that this is an issue. And then we went and actually looked at it and realized that actually the atmosphere on Yela is like 1% of Damar's atmosphere. And as a result, there's pretty much no air resistance. There's nothing to slow you down, which is completely realistic. So we were like, well, in this situation, this is not a bug, this is an actual feature. And so we have that already. We're still working on things like weather and storms and stuff. I think we saw that at last year's CitizenCon with the sandstorm. Stuff like that will affect the handling and stuff, but we're not quite there yet. But we already want, particularly the atmospheric density effects, the handling, and then weather changes will also affect it. But that's a future goal that we haven't quite got to yet.
So the flight model that we have today, I took the approach where it's basically the same control system that you have in space, but then we have the addition of drag and turbulence and gravity forces. So IFCS will actually work to remove those forces, allocating thrust to countering gravity and countering drag, and then having removed those forces, then it uses the same motion profiles that it would use in space to control the ship. So the result is you feel like you have less thrust available because it's being used for other things, and you definitely feel the turbulence, but overall it's still the same flight model that we have in space. Whereas the new model, I've actually already worked out the calculations for it. I just need to get it into the engine. Will actually include these additional forces, lift, drag, and gravity, in its calculations to carry out whatever actions that the player is trying to achieve. So for example, if you're sitting here and you want to go down, rather than countering gravity and then pushing you down, it'll just generate less upward thrust so that it just drops gently down, using gravity to your advantage. So that's the main difference. The player in the game will be able to start taking better advantage of those additional forces of lift, drag, and gravity.
It's been developed pretty much to separate the feeling of flight from space and atmosphere, and it's partially, a gameplay decision that it's nice to sort of have your general moment-to-moment gameplay be refreshed. So, You know, when you're playing the game and you're in space, you sort of are inclined to get used to flying in a certain way. And then when you get into the atmosphere, we would like you to sort of feel different, and we would like you to change your gameplay style and to feel that, you know, this is different and you need to adjust your gameplay, which is sort of like, you know, you can take the analogy of, you know, when you're watching a movie or when you're writing a movie, you pace it so that you have moments of like this high intensity, and then we're going to give the audience a break for a minute and do something. It's sort of like that, but with gameplay. So you're going to be flying around, and then we want to change it up a bit and just, you know, give you some different experience for a few minutes, which keeps the gameplay a bit more interesting. But on top of that, it's really important that this meets the expectations that a player would have about flying in atmosphere. And this is where the feedback from Gamescom came from. People would see the ships flying in atmosphere and they would be like, this doesn't really look right. You know, like the ship is just like, it's like a fly just darting around and moving around like this in atmosphere. I mean, it's realistic. If someone were to make a spacecraft in real life that had the power that our ships do, it would behave like that. But it doesn't look good, and it doesn't feel good. And so a lot of that is to also make it feel better and make it look better. So that, you know, players get into the atmosphere. Maybe you're like sitting on the planet and you see your friend fly in with some ship and you see it like bustling around in the wind and everything. You're like, oh, you know, it looks really cool. That's also what we're going for. I think most of the challenges have been figuring out where the line is to, it's sort of like less of a technical challenge and more of a design issue of where's this line between being realistic and being suitable for gameplay. That's really difficult to do. It's really easy to make this perfectly, you know, hyper-realistic simulation, but that's just not fun, unfortunately. And so we have to, like, you know, we do things really realistically and then we go, this might not be the best way to do this. We have to actually go back and try and, you know, adjust the system to be more fun and to consider how we can accommodate the players', you know, needs and wants out of the system. We've had issues as well, particularly where, say, QA or Avocado are testing the game and they have some feedback that isn't really specific. Like they'll just say, oh, say Graveler bikes, for example, they don't handle well. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, why? Can you not turn quick enough? Are they losing control too much? Like, there's so many things that could potentially contribute to it doesn't feel good. And in the case of Gravlev, you know, it's usually lots of things. So we have to sort of try and figure out what in this system could actually be giving you the behavior that you have, and how can we fix that. And that doesn't sound like too much of a technical issue, but from a design side, it's really, really hard to do that. And it's a thing that we're constantly sort of learning about as people play the game and test it. We're figuring out, you know, this isn't working, or this isn't really fun, we need to try and reconsider this. And then we have to, again, convert this like vague, it's not fun feedback into actual like hard technical feedback of, oh, this bit of force is being applied too much, or we're rotating the ship a fraction too much here, or whatever it is. And that transition is hard. It's really hard.
One of the main challenges we had was the Afterburner deceleration. You're at 1200 meters a second when you hit the upper atmosphere, and you need to be able to slow it down before you crash into that planet. When we first put this upper Afterburner speed in, everyone in QA, including design, were just flying into the planets, crashing, exploding, being furious with the whole thing. So we had to come up with another approach. The initial idea was you'd have less acceleration, but you'd be able to hit higher velocity. So when you went into cruise, up through normal SCM Afterburner velocities into cruise Afterburner, you'd have less acceleration, so it would slowly push you up to the high velocities. But we found with that as soon as you hit the crossover threshold from an SCM Afterburner to the cruise Afterburner, you lost control of the ship. It became too hard to move because everything was scaled down to lower level acceleration. You'd cross over and then you'd try and turn and you'd feel like you're just drifting forever. So that we wanted to fix that immediately. I mean, that wasn't the intended goal. We wanted to have it slower to get to the velocities but still keep control. So I had to play around with all of the different scaling values to make sure that The manoeuvring thrusters weren't affected, but it was just the main thrusters that were affected. So it would take longer to get there, and then also give like a buff to the retro thrusters. If you imagine you were shunting all the power or the thrust capacity to the front to stop you faster, that's kind of the idea we're going with here. So when you cross into the atmosphere, you'll feel like you've got more control to stop. And whereas the terminal velocity and the max safe speed will also restrict your velocity and slow you down, it was also the afterburner scaling that would help you get there faster. So while big ships like the Caterpillar will still have an issue coming into atmosphere and stopping in time, if you're pushing it, because it's got such limited control once you get into the atmosphere, smaller vessels should be able to get in there and stop and not have an issue. But finding that right balance was the challenge, not making them too powerful, not making them too weak. And we had to have a lot of back and forth with QA on that, and probably more with PTU to come.
Future plans, we do have things that we want to do, so even things like the thruster effects, which we've had long-standing thruster effects in our game, we want to bring in some visual differences to them when you're in the atmosphere. So one example will be we've got shock diamonds in some of our thruster effects that you actually see in space. Now, technically speaking, you wouldn't see shock diamonds when you're not in atmosphere. So for a long time, we've wanted to actually play around with that and actually have little details that only appear when you're in atmosphere. So not necessarily really clear, like really obvious things, but just subtle differences. So there's all kinds of things we want to do along those lines, in the future.
At this point, we don't have the full atmospheric simulation, which includes weather systems, in place. So I've put in a placeholder system that simulates wind. I actually had storms for an earlier demo, but I pulled that out for the 3.0 release. We won't need that. But we will have some variation of wind based on altitude and wind direction, which is consistent based on your location, within the sphere of a planet. So everyone will have the same wind, as well as wind gusts, that can reach, fairly high velocity. So if you're flying along and, wind is going in one direction, you're going to feel stronger drag in that direction. But if you're flying with the wind, you'll feel less drag. The ship won't be working as hard, in order to fly with the wind versus against the wind. There definitely is wind turbulence, and so the more the wind blows, you'll kind of shake the ship, kind of push it around a little bit, And when you get into really high wind or high gust conditions, which you can at places, you'll feel it more. Now, this is all based on the kind of the pristine state of the ship. So a ship, when it comes in, it's designed so that its center of drag is fairly aligned with its center of mass. So there's not a lot of drag that comes from a lot of torque that comes from the drag on the ship. But if you blow off a wing or whatever and it shifts the center of drag relative to the center of mass, then you have this moment arm, right? So when the drag force is applied to the ship, it tends to push it, to torque it around. We have thrusters, which aircraft don't have. We have thrusters available, and so they're always countering that, and it'll try to keep you as best as it can. It'll keep you from spinning around and just going out of control, which is what you would do if it was just an aircraft. But at some point, when you've taken damage, your thrusters, you're not going to have that ability. So if you fly slow enough, you'll be fine, but if you fly too fast, you'll find yourself just completely, spinning out of control.
Chris really wants it that you can basically hit aerodynamic limits. Like if you take a plane in real life and you fly it at high speeds toward the ground and then pull up, the wings eventually will reach a point where they're like, no, we can't do this anymore, and they'll just break off. And I think that's what Chris wants us to get towards. It's quite complicated to try and work out where those forces are, because we don't have a full-on fluid simulation that you would have in a professional flight simulator. And in simulations like that, it's quite easy to be like, well, there's force here on this point, but we can't really do that. So we have to still come up with a solution for how to do that in a realistic, but also suitable for the game and suitable to fit in with the rest of the game. And then we'll pretty much have that aerodynamic failures where parts of the ship just can't take the pressure anymore and they'll just break off.
Right now, we're kind of in between with the atmospheric model. We did a first pass on it that got the ships flying in the atmosphere fairly quickly, but it's not as accurate a flight model as we want. After 3.0 is out, I'll be introducing a new flight model, which will improve it quite a bit. I think right now, the main thing that players will feel when they're flying is the difference in the amount of acceleration available because of drag and things like that, right? And the turbulence that's applied to the ship, but it still won't feel as different from spaceflight as what we want. And that's coming next.
As you can see, the physics and control systems are going to make for a very visceral, in-atmosphere experience.
That's all for this week. Next Thursday, tune in to our holiday ATV special focused on Squadron 42, streaming on Twitch at 12 p.m. PST.
Speaking of Squadron 42, check your inbox for a dedicated newsletter that went out today.
And don't forget, Jump Point Volume 3 hardcover is available for sale now to subscribers.
As always, thanks to our subscribers for supporting shows like the ATV Holiday Special. We encourage you to all vote in our poll collecting feedback for your perks. You can access it via the link in this month's subscriber newsletter or by visiting the subscriber forums.
Finally, thanks to all of our backers. Your dedication is helping to make Star Citizen the best damn space sim ever.
Until next week, we'll see you
around the verse.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.